You ever go to LinkedIn or go to a conference and see somebody else who's just nailing it with their content marketing? And I'm always curious, how are they doing it? What does it look like behind the scenes? So in this podcast, that's what we're going to explore. I'm going to ask dumb questions of smart people to figure out how content marketing is working these days and how you and I can take away actionable steps for our businesses. Welcome to the podcast.
Ben Wise, I am the founder of Story.
It's easy to write off social media and be like, okay, yeah, it doesn't work.
Adapt it to who you are.
Karl, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So do you want to introduce us, kind of who you are and what you do?
I like to tell people is I help them gather and create feedback loops because I think, especially in marketing, you have to get that feedback quickly and then be able to create systems around that feedback. And so that's basically what I do, help them create those feedback loops so they can use those feedbacks to create systems that help them drive growth.
Unpack that a little bit for me. Where did this idea come from? Can't I just create content if I have a good idea?
Yeah, you can. But is it working, right? And the feedback that you're getting, like on YouTube or in your podcast, I think especially with podcasting, there is less feedback channels. I think YouTube does a good job of encouraging thumbs up, thumbs down, comments, shares, the algorithm. There's so many people on there. It's kind of hard to break through, which I think is a little bit easier for podcasting and some, other more niche outlets. But the idea then is, okay, once you're creating this content and then you're building it, once you build it, are they going to come and are they going to keep coming back? And I think that's the question. People can come to your content once or twice, but if they don't come back, then it's not working.
Describe to me the process. Is this a process or is this more of are you talking about software too?
I would say it's both, right? You can't do one without the other. Especially now with AI, I think a lot of people need to think and rebuild their systems based on AI. From a content perspective, I use AI in all my content. I use ChatGPT. I use Claude. I'm starting to dabble with Notebook LM. But once you realize how these tools work, what works well, what doesn't, then you can start to recreate your system so they're more efficient. They're saving you time. And you're creating better content, not just creating more content.
What do you mean by better content? And then I want to come back to all right, walk me through how this could work, let's say on a podcast episode, but we'll get to that later. What do you mean by better content?
I think it depends on the goal. So the people who are listening, ask yourself, why are you creating content? So often, the surface level is, I want people to pay attention to what I have to say. But underneath it, are you trying to drive sales? Are you trying to drive brand awareness? What are you really trying to get after? And then when you realize that, then you can start to create those metrics on the back end. And I think this is coming back to your question of, really creating those feedback loops in your content. So you're creating better content. It's looking at those metrics. It's looking at that consistently. And this is where I think a lot of people fall flat in their systems is they're almost scared. They're scared to look at what are those results and then have to do the hard work of well, that's not quite working like I thought it would. And often they scrap it, which is one of the worst things you can do because now you've lost all your data. You have to start all over again. And now you're at ground zero. So the idea is creating content and then iterating on that content, gathering that feedback, looking at what's working, what's not. And a lot of times that is impressions or that is likes. And then as you go deeper, comments, is it driving sales, all those things that you're trying to do with your content.
Mm-hmm. Well, tell me your story just a little bit about what got you into this. Was there a moment that you thought, man, I got to build, connect content to systems to measure effectiveness? Certainly not a direction I would think I would ever go. So tell me about that with my knowing myself. I'm just saying, where did the inspiration for this come from, and how did it get started?
It started with my own struggles. Really, trying to create stuff that people wanted, and it would draw attention to me. I always believed in the idea of magnets, like you draw people to you by, doing great stuff. It's like if you are a service-based company and you do great work and that client wants to come back and work with you more, when you realize if you have like a 3 month or 6 month engagement and those stop and consistently stop, and they're not like, hey, I have this other project we could probably work on, or I'm also struggling in this area, then you're not delivering as much value as you probably should. And those little metrics of, wait, I don't have a lot of returning clients. So what am I doing? Is it my onboarding? Is it my communication style? Is it the product that I'm delivering? And that's when you start. And this is that hard work of like, well, that's not working. Why is it not working? And really getting curious about it.
Yeah. I mean, I'll confess I'm not the best at looking backwards. I always want to look forwards as a
Me too.
entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's why I believe in it so much, because I kept faltering and I was like, oh, wait, if I do these things, I'm going to get better results, because it's noticing those patterns and then you can iterate on those patterns.
Was there, I mean, see, if you're saying that was the default for you, and it is the default for me now, what would you say to someone like me who is in that pre-systems Karl Staib stage? Is there anything that inspired you to start looking back? What was that?
Start small is how I would, anybody who's listening, don't go in and be like, okay, I'm going to recreate all my systems. It starts just by documenting. I am a big believer in journaling. Look back on your day, what went well, what didn't, and then where can you find some small tweaks. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to build that muscle, and you're just like, okay, yeah, I got distracted by YouTube for a half hour and I'm like, or I didn't, I put out this piece of content, but I never looked back at the engagement or why it mattered. All these things that we often do kind of automatically, but we don't really have a system around it. And that's the thing is like, if you can try to block off time, and usually around this time of the day, around 4 o'clock, I try to look and say, okay, this piece of content, what worked, what didn't. And then I take notes and I document. I'm like, okay, well, my feeling is that didn't work that well, that piece, compared to other pieces. And this is those patterns that you can start to notice. And when you do that over time, you're building that muscle up, and then it gets easier. And then you can say, okay, like, well, that's not so bad. I've got this little system of reviewing my content at the end of the day. Now I can work on something else. Or, and this is what a lot of people probably just move on to the next thing, myself included. But then it's like, okay, well, now what do I need to do? What should I do? Should I, how should I adjust my content? Make it shorter, make it longer, make it more visual. Should I, try to insert more video and less text? Like LinkedIn is very text heavy, but it's starting to lean towards more video. And just like any platform, it's the stickiest stuff, especially TikTok knows this. And so how do you start to say, okay, well, how do I make it a little bit stickier? And what you're doing is you're planting those seeds, and over time, it gets easier to ideate. And this is where a lot of people struggle is they're like, I have to come up with all these new ideas, but you're just not making it easy for yourself to start to see those patterns and be like, well, what if I tried this? And that's a key part is, what if I tried this? Plants that seed of that curiosity, because then you automatically, most of us come up with a hypothesis like, wait, if I shorten my content, or hey, if I, created this intro in my videos, or I tried to, put some, different transitions in there. And now you're realizing, oh, people are sticking around longer. You got to win. And that's the stuff that we can document, be like, it worked. And that's what encourages you to keep doing that stuff.
Yeah, looking back is what inspires adjustments and getting better for the future. That makes a lot of sense. I'm curious, was there a moment in your own content creation journey where that system of documenting and looking back improved your content? Can you share an example?
And I think this is something that probably a lot of people struggle with, is really niching down. And I wanted to be everything to everybody, and I was like, I can help anybody with their systems, and I can't, and I really realized, like, I am not one to, I can't code. I don't really have the ability to use APIs to make different platforms talk to each other to automate things. And so I would talk about that stuff. I would talk about, documenting SOPs, which is still important. And I still teach people that. But really my content has, as I've honed in, is, helping people create feedback loops, ask for feedback. Don't allow your ego to get in the way of good feedback. That's something I teach a lot of my clients. It's not about you. It's just about your business and how you can make it better. And when you start to divorce yourself from your ego, I think life gets better too. So it's like it's a little extra bonus. Like you realize, oh yeah, I'm actually helping these people, let go of their ego a little bit and realize it doesn't often make the best decisions. So, but yeah, and as I've honed in, I'm getting more outreach, more clients are interested in what I have to say, because I'm really niching down and focusing on my type of people.
And your type of people is who?
It's usually family-owned businesses, people who have teams of, I would say, 15 to 50 people, and it gets a little hairy, and you're trying to coordinate all these different things. And so, what I also talk about too is creating feedback loops internally, because I think often people do ask for feedback. I don't think they do a great job of asking for feedback, really, honing in on really good questions that they should ask their customers. But also the feedback you're getting from employees and how they see things and the things that they can help you improve. And I think that's when you start compounding the people that you hire. That's where I think AI is so far off finding those patterns for you, because you have to prompt a lot to get for AI to kind of help you figure out what your next step is. And just like you said, you're like, I'm thinking about the future, and I'm thinking AI is more like what happened in the past and how can I correlate that to now? They don't really think about how they can look into the future, and it's going to get better and better. So who knows? It could be a year and a half off. It could be sooner, but that to me is where employees are. They're just fantastic, because they'll help you find stuff and really hone in on where to make those improvements.
Was there ever a time in your content where you thought something was going to be great, and then your feedback process, which actually I realized I need to ask you about that. Like, what does your own process look like for looking through your content? And was there a time where it caused you to pause and change the direction you were going with your content, since that's what we're talking about today?
I realize people love the idea of SOPs and documentation, but it's not very sexy. It's giving people the medicine that they should take. And so just looking at trying to create that content, explain how the importance of documentation and, making, not making, but encouraging employees to really document their step-by-step process. And it's hard. It's hard for get people to start to change these habits and be able to adjust. And so a lot of people did not like that content that much. So over time, you start to hone in and like, I find sometimes when I talk about ego in business, it does well. And I really haven't figured that part out, like why it does well and sometimes it doesn't. I think what I've found is usually when I hold the mirror up to them, it's harder for them to look. So I usually hold the mirror up to other people, and then it makes them kind of still have that aha moment. So just little things like that, honing in on that, and then being like, okay, how do I make this sexier that people actually want to consume, and then still giving the medicine as they are working and doing these things.
That's the eternal struggle, isn't it? There's I heard the saying, you want to give when you're in your messaging to prospects, you want to talk about you want to make your messaging like aspirin versus aspirational. That's not just an original quote. That is not mine. I forget who it is, but it's really hard to do that, though, to say, well, let me create a message or content that is aspirin, so to speak, for my headache and not aspirational, because you know what your client or your company should be doing, but that doesn't mean they're going to receive it well. So you need to come in with an aspirin type message, and I'm warning, it's a lifelong type pursuit for some of us. Do you have like a typical process you use to follow for these feedback loops? Is it just I take a look once a week and I have some theories and I go back to those theories and I see if that held true? Give me an example.
Yeah. It's looking back, I try to do it daily. And then that allows me to come up with ideas for future. And then I just kind of document like what I'm seeing, what's working, what's not. And I also ask for feedback from people in the comments. Try to find out, like, hey, like, why did this resonate with you? And really get that one-on-one type of experience that I don't think a lot of people do. They're busy. They have busy lives. They don't ask that type of stuff, but that's what engages people. Same thing with my email list. About, I would say, at least once every 6 weeks, maybe every other. So about 6 times a year, I will link to my survey, and that survey helps me dig in and understand where my people are at, what type of people have joined, and trying to get that feedback. And then working with clients, I find, if depending on the size of your audience, if you have a large audience, it makes it much easier to get the feedback you need from surveys. But I still recommend interviews. And I think when you interview your customers, it's gold, like it changes how you create your marketing content. And that's something I wanted to touch on. And I'm glad we're getting down this path, because I think if you can interview, I suggest to people that they try to interview at least one customer a month. Try to be consistent with it, because your customers are changing, you're changing, and it helps you stay on track with your messaging. It helps you stay on track with your products. It shows you, and I like to call it the lighthouse method. It helps you build lighthouses around your assets. So customer base is your asset. So how are you making sure you don't crash into the rocks? Because what I found is, I was working with a client and he was having trouble. People would leave his membership after within the first month. And what he found out was his emails were broken. So he had changed it, and it's 6 months later, and now he's seeing this drop off, but he was never asking. He was just like, what's going on? Like, is it my content? And as business owners, sometimes we go to that fear of, oh, it's my content, or they don't like this. And the reality is sometimes your systems are broken, and it's just as simple as fixing this email, communication system that you make some adjustments, it starts going out right. It started writing a ship. And so little things like that you just don't often catch. And as you do this and as you check on these things, and that's real quick, if you're creating content and you're doing it consistently, that's when you can see those patterns. And same thing with feedback loops from, customers. You see these patterns, and that to me is like, oh, it's pattern recognition. And that can make a huge difference in how you create and then what you're putting out there.
I totally resonate with that. I mean, I do my own informal audits from time to time on my email and open rates and my, clicks and things like that. Or on my videos, I'll see, this one got a lot of views or a lot of comments, and you have to take it with a grain of salt, because sometimes algorithms will pick something up that, will skew the data, so to speak. What's a sign of a good, mature feedback loop in your opinion?
It's consistently informing how you are delivering on your content and on your products. Because I think if it's haphazard, you're going to get haphazard results. So the more consistent you are and building those systems, so you're checking it every month, you're checking it depending if you're really reliant on your content, it should be probably like once a week or at least every other week. And then the businesses that it's more like supplemental, it's probably you should be doing it like once a month. Like especially with ads, you're spending money on ads, you're creating these ads, and then you're not checking on how well they're performing. And I know we're busy, but man, you have to have those feedback loops. You've got to check in, you've got to look, you've got to see what's working, what's not, and then being able to make those adjustments.
Good. Well, this has been really encouraging for me, Karl. A nudge for me, at least, as a person who's a serial forward looker and never look back person. And it's really making me realize, okay, so my next step is I need to just schedule time every week to look back at some of these things, because I have been doing things haphazardly, and I suspect that is informing how well things are turning out in the future. It's not just about good ideas; it's about execution. If you can't measure the execution, how do you know how well you're executing
Exactly.
to the level you should be?
Yeah.
Yeah. Good reminder. Thanks, Karl, for being here. Where can people learn more about you?
Systematicleader.co. And I have a /guide. So if people want to go, they can sign up for email list. And that gives them a bunch of guides, questions they can ask customers, whole bunch of stuff. And Systematic Leader podcast too.